The truth was simple and devastating. The quiet woman watering flowers in a small Portland garden was not poor, not ordinary, and not powerless. She was one of the richest women on earth. The only man who should have known that had never even imagined it. Emma Carter looked exactly like the kind of woman people forgot about. She wore soft sweaters, faded jeans, and comfortable shoes bought on clearance racks. Her brown hair was usually tied loosely behind her neck, and her hands were often stained with soil from tending the small vegetable garden beside her modest suburban home. Neighbors waved at her when they walked their dogs in the early morning mist, and Emma always smiled back warmly the way kind people do when they expect nothing in return. No one suspected that the woman trimming lavender bushes beside the porch had once signed documents worth more money than entire cities. To them, she was simply Ryan Brooks's quiet wife, the polite volunteer from the local library who always brought homemade bread to charity events. Ryan Brooks, 35 years old, handsome in the confident way that came easily to ambitious men, believed he had married a woman with nothing but a gentle heart. He worked downtown as a financial analyst in a mid-level investment firm, the kind of place where employees spent long nights dreaming about the wealth they were sure they deserved someday. Ryan liked to imagine himself standing in glass offices overlooking Manhattan skylines, shaking hands with powerful investors, discussing deals worth billions. But each evening he returned instead to the quiet suburb outside Portland, where his wife waited with dinner and the calm domestic life he once claimed to want. Emma listened patiently to his frustrations about money, about opportunity, about how the world rewarded the wrong people. She would nod, pour him another cup of coffee, and tell him softly that success would come in time. What Ryan never knew was that Emma Carter was not her real name. The name she had buried 7 years earlier was Emma Whitmore. The Whitmore family did not belong to Portland suburbs or grocery coupons. They belonged to private jets, boardroom negotiations, and international headlines. Whitmore Global Holdings controlled technology firms, energy networks, and real estate across multiple continents. Economists estimated the empire's value at more than $220 billion, though the true number was known only to a handful of lawyers and financial advisors who guarded the family secrets like national treasure. When Emma's parents died in a tragic plane crash while she was only 20 years old, the entire fortune passed to her overnight. One day, she had been a university student studying art history. The next day, she had become one of the most powerful heirs on the planet. Power frightened her more than poverty ever could. For years, her life had been suffocated by bodyguards, advisors, and executives who spoke to her not as a young woman, but as the key to unimaginable wealth. Every friendship felt suspicious. Every smile carried calculation. Emma had begun to believe that no one would ever look at her without seeing the billions attached to her last name. That was why, during her final year at the University of Washington, she made the decision that shocked the few people who truly knew her. She stepped away from the empire. Her legal advisors placed the Whitmore fortune into a complicated blind trust that no one could access without her explicit command. She changed her name, moved to Oregon, and vanished from the world that had been waiting to crown her. Ryan Brooks met her during that escape. He saw a quiet student reading alone in the campus coffee shop, a woman who laughed easily and spoke with curiosity about art, music, and the strange beauty of ordinary life. Ryan admired her simplicity. Emma admired what she believed was his sincerity. He talked about dreams rather than money, about building something meaningful instead of inheriting it. For the first time in her life, Emma felt that someone was looking directly at her, not through her fortune. When he proposed after 2 years of dating, promising a life built on love rather than wealth, Emma believed him with the fragile hope of someone who had never truly been loved without conditions. So Emma Whitmore disappeared completely, and Emma Carter was born. For 7 years, she lived quietly beside her husband, cooking dinners, planting flowers, and believing that the greatest risk she had ever taken had finally given her the normal life she wanted. Ryan thought he had married a woman with no money, no connections, and no power at all. Emma allowed him to believe that. What neither of them understood was that a secret like hers could never stay buried forever. And when the truth finally surfaced, it would not simply change their lives. It would destroy one of them. At first, Ryan Brooks loved the quiet life he had built with Emma Carter. Their small house outside Portland felt peaceful compared to the noisy ambition of the financial district where he worked. He used to come home smiling, dropping his briefcase near the door and wrapping his arms around Emma while she stirred pasta on the stove. Back then, he said simple things that made her heart soften. He said she made the world slow down. He said money was not everything. Emma believed every word because she wanted to believe that a man could value love more than success. But ambition is a quiet fire. It rarely explodes all at once. It grows slowly, feeding on comparison, on envy, on the constant whisper that someone else is living the life you deserve. Ryan's job at the investment firm exposed him to people who had everything he wanted. Clients arrived in luxury cars. Executives wore watches worth more than his yearly salary. Partners talked casually about investments worth hundreds of millions of dollars, while Ryan sat nearby taking notes like a spectator watching someone else's victory. Every day he saw a world that seemed close enough to touch, but always just beyond his reach. At first, he only complained occasionally. One evening, he mentioned a coworker whose fiancée had received a diamond ring so large that the entire office had gathered around to admire it. Another night, he talked about a networking event where investors discussed vacation homes in Aspen and private yachts in the Mediterranean. Emma listened quietly while washing dishes, offering gentle encouragement the way she always did. She told him success took time. She reminded him that they had each other and that many people with money still felt empty. Ryan would nod, but something restless had already begun to take root in his mind. Gradually, his tone changed. Instead of dreaming about the future, he began criticizing the present. He complained about the old Toyota they drove, about the small size of their house, about how Emma always seemed satisfied with so little. The things he once admired in her now irritated him. Her simple clothes looked embarrassing compared to the designer outfits he saw at corporate events. Her quiet nature felt like weakness when he needed someone who could impress powerful investors. Ryan started staying out later after work, attending more networking parties, chasing opportunities that always seemed one conversation away. Emma noticed the changes long before he admitted them. She saw the way his smile tightened when he looked around their modest kitchen. She noticed the expensive perfume on his jacket when he came home late at night. Sometimes he spoke with a sharp impatience she had never heard before, as if the life they shared had become a burden he was forced to carry. Emma tried to talk to him gently, asking if something was wrong, asking if she had done something to upset him. Ryan brushed her questions aside, saying he was simply stressed from work. The truth finally slipped out during a quiet argument one evening when frustration overwhelmed his restraint. Ryan threw his briefcase onto the table and stared around the house with visible irritation. He said he felt trapped, that his career could move faster if he had the right connections. Then he looked directly at Emma and said something that made the air between them suddenly cold. He said he needed a partner who could help him rise, someone with resources and influence. The word resources hung in the room like a blade. Emma did not answer immediately. She only watched him with a calm expression that hid the strange mixture of sadness and disbelief moving through her chest. Ryan thought he had just insulted a poor woman who could offer him nothing. What he did not realize was that the person standing in front of him possessed more resources than he could imagine. The irony was almost unbearable. The man who demanded wealth from his wife had been living beside a fortune large enough to reshape entire industries, and he had never even noticed. The night that destroyed Emma Carter's marriage began with candlelight and hope. Outside their quiet home in the Portland suburbs, the autumn air carried the faint smell of rain and falling leaves. Inside, the dining table looked like a scene from an old romantic movie. Emma had spent the entire afternoon preparing it. A white tablecloth lay neatly across the polished wood. 2 candles flickered gently between plates of handmade pasta, and a bottle of red wine waited unopened beside their glasses. It was their 7th wedding anniversary. For Emma, it felt like a chance to repair the invisible cracks that had begun spreading through their life together. She had recreated the exact meal from their first date the night when Ryan Brooks had looked at her, as if she were the most fascinating person in the world. Back then, his voice carried warmth, his ambition softened by genuine affection. Emma remembered how he had laughed easily, how he had promised that one day they would build a life that felt meaningful instead of impressive. As she adjusted the candles and smoothed the edge of her simple blue dress, Emma allowed herself to believe that maybe the man she fell in love with was still somewhere beneath the recent coldness. Maybe tonight he would remember who they used to be. Ryan arrived 3 hours late. When the front door finally opened, the quiet house filled with the sound of hurried footsteps and the sharp click of his briefcase landing on the table. He did not notice the candles or the carefully prepared dinner. His attention was fixed entirely on the thick envelope he carried in one hand. His face looked energized in a way Emma had not seen for months, his eyes bright with the kind of excitement that comes when someone believes their future has suddenly changed. Without sitting down, he placed the envelope directly beside her plate. Emma looked at it confused. The paper felt heavy when she lifted it, the legal texture unfamiliar against her fingers. Slowly she opened it, scanning the first few lines, before the words blurred together in disbelief. Divorce papers. The formal language was cold and precise, describing the end of a marriage that Emma had believed was built on love. Her hands trembled slightly as she looked up at Ryan. The candles flickered softly between them, casting shadows across his face that made his expression look almost unfamiliar. Ryan did not appear nervous. In fact, he looked strangely relieved. He loosened his tie and leaned back in his chair as if he had just finished an exhausting task. Then he explained everything with the calm confidence of someone who believed he had made the smartest decision of his life. He told Emma he had been offered a new opportunity, a position in a private investment firm that would finally place him among the elite financial players he had always admired. The opportunity came from a powerful banking family in Chicago. Their daughter, Olivia Harrison, had taken a particular interest in Ryan's ambition. Emma listened quietly as the pieces fell together with painful clarity. The late nights, the expensive perfume she had noticed on his jacket, the growing impatience in his voice whenever he looked around their modest home. It had never been about work stress. Ryan had already moved on. He was not just leaving her for another woman. He was leaving for wealth, influence, and the powerful connections he believed she could never provide. Ryan leaned forward slightly and spoke with a tone that sounded almost generous, as if he were doing Emma a favor. He said she could keep the house and the car. He explained that it was the least he could do after 7 years together. Then he delivered the sentence that would echo in Emma's mind long after he walked out the door. Ryan said she had given him nothing. He said the problem with their marriage was that she simply had nothing to offer his future. Emma did not cry. She sat perfectly still, absorbing every word while something inside her quietly shifted. Ryan believed he was abandoning a poor woman who could not help him succeed. The truth was far more dangerous. He had just thrown away a woman whose wealth could have given him everything he dreamed of, and Emma was beginning to remember exactly who she really was. The house felt hollow after Ryan Brooks slammed the door behind him. The candles on the anniversary table burned slowly into pools of melted wax, while the untouched pasta cooled under the soft kitchen lights. Emma Carter remained seated for a long time, staring at the legal papers spread across the table as if they belonged to someone else's life. 7 years of marriage had ended in a few casual sentences. Ryan believed he had escaped a burden. He believed he was finally free to chase the life he deserved. What he did not understand was that the woman he had just abandoned was not broken. she was waking up. Emma stood slowly and walked through the quiet house that had once felt like a sanctuary. Now it looked like a stage set after the actors had gone home. Photographs of vacations, small souvenirs from road trips, the ordinary objects of a marriage that had once seemed genuine. She moved through each room with calm precision, gathering every reminder of Ryan and placing them into large black bags. She did not cry. The pain sat deep in her chest, heavy and cold, but something stronger had begun forming beneath it. For 7 years, she had buried the most powerful identity in her life. Tonight, that buried woman began to rise. When Emma finally stopped moving, she stood in front of the hallway mirror. The reflection staring back at her looked tired, pale, and strangely unfamiliar. The woman in the mirror wore one of Ryan's old shirts and the simple gold wedding band he had once slid onto her finger with trembling hands. That woman had been Emma Carter, the quiet wife who believed love was enough. But Ryan had destroyed that illusion with ruthless efficiency. Slowly, Emma removed the ring and placed it carefully on the table. The moment the metal touched the wood, something inside her mind shifted into clarity. She reached for her phone and scrolled through contacts she had not touched in 7 years. Plumbers, neighbors, the local bakery, ordinary names from an ordinary life. Then her finger stopped on a name that carried the weight of an entirely different world. Michael Grant. The call connected almost immediately. On the other end of the line was the steady voice of the man who had served as legal counsel to the Whitmore family for more than 3 decades. When Emma spoke, her voice sounded calm, but the meaning behind her words changed everything. She told him it was time to activate Protocol Omega. There was a brief silence before Michael Grant answered with quiet understanding. Protocol Omega had been designed years earlier as the emergency mechanism that would restore Emma Whitmore's full authority over the Whitmore empire. Within minutes, the machinery of one of the most powerful corporate networks in the world began moving again. Lawyers were alerted, security teams mobilized, financial systems prepared to transfer control of hundreds of companies back to the woman who owned them. Emma Carter had lived quietly in Portland for 7 years. Emma Whitmore had just returned. Exactly 1 hour later, the quiet suburban street was illuminated by the headlights of a long black Bentley gliding silently to the curb. The driver stepped out and opened the door with the precise professionalism of someone accustomed to serving billionaires. Emma took one final look at the small house where she had tried to build a normal life. The garden she had planted still shimmered with dew under the porch light. For a moment, she remembered the version of herself who had believed love would be enough. Then she stepped into the car without looking back. The Bentley carried her through the sleeping city toward a private airfield where a Whitmore Global jet waited with engines already humming. As Emma settled into the leather seat, a secure tablet appeared in her hands, displaying the consolidated value of the Whitmore holdings she now controlled again. The number at the bottom of the screen read $224.8 billion. Emma studied the figure with quiet focus, not pride. Ryan Brooks had left her for a woman with resources. Tonight, he had unknowingly declared war on the most powerful resource he would ever encounter. Ryan Brooks believed he had escaped a small life. He believed the door he slammed behind him in Portland had closed forever on Emma Carter. What he did not realize was that the woman he left behind had just stepped back into a world powerful enough to reshape his future without ever touching him directly. New York welcomed Emma Whitmore like a queen returning from exile. The Whitmore Global headquarters rose above Manhattan as a wall of glass and steel, 80 floors of influence overlooking the restless energy of the financial district. When Emma walked through the lobby 2 days after leaving Portland, conversations stopped mid-sentence. Executives who had managed the empire in her absence stood slowly as if witnessing a ghost step out of the past. 7 years earlier, she had left as a grieving young heir trying to escape the weight of unimaginable wealth. Now she returned as a woman sharpened by betrayal and clarity. Michael Grant waited beside the long conference table in the executive boardroom. His silver hair and precise posture reflected decades spent protecting the Whitmore fortune. He greeted Emma with a respectful nod, rather than emotional warmth. The moment required professionalism, not sentiment. Around the table sat 12 board members who had grown comfortable making decisions without the presence of the family that owned everything. Their expressions carried a mixture of curiosity and quiet anxiety as Emma took the chair at the head of the table, the seat that once belonged to her father. The room remained silent for several seconds. Emma allowed the silence to stretch, studying the faces of the men who had guided the empire in her absence. Finally, she spoke, her voice calm, but carrying a firmness that erased any doubt about who controlled the room. She apologized briefly for her long absence, explaining only that she had been pursuing a private chapter of her life. Then she shifted immediately into business. Financial reports appeared on the wall screen as she dissected the company's recent performance with surgical precision. Missed opportunities. Conservative investments. Markets that Whitmore Global should have dominated but had merely observed. The board members listened carefully as Emma moved through the numbers with astonishing speed. Her mind had not softened during those years away. If anything, the distance had sharpened her ability to see weaknesses others ignored. Within 20 minutes, the atmosphere in the room changed from cautious curiosity to focused attention. The quiet woman who had vanished from the empire years earlier had returned as a strategist capable of commanding an entire financial battlefield. Then Emma revealed the move that made several executives exchange startled glances. On the screen appeared the profile of a rapidly growing logistics technology firm based in San Francisco. The company had developed predictive shipping algorithms capable of transforming global supply networks. For months, several investment groups had been attempting to acquire it. One of the most aggressive bidders was a Chicago banking family expanding into private equity markets. The Harrison family. Emma paused long enough for the name to settle into the room. She knew exactly who they were. She also knew exactly who Ryan Brooks was planning to work for. Whitmore Global had already submitted an acquisition offer earlier that morning. $1.6 billion in direct capital. A figure so high that the Harrison Investment Group would struggle to match it without risking their entire new venture. Emma explained the strategy without emotion. The acquisition would strengthen Whitmore Global's logistics division while simultaneously weakening a rising competitor before their expansion truly began. No one in the room mentioned Ryan Brooks. No one knew the personal history behind Emma's decision. To the board, it appeared to be a bold, strategic move by a returning chief executive determined to remind the market who controlled the industry. Michael Grant watched her quietly from the corner of the table, understanding more than anyone else that the decision carried a deeper meaning. Far away in Chicago, Ryan Brooks celebrated the beginning of his new career with Olivia Harrison and her influential family. He spoke confidently about future investments, about the fortune he believed he was finally close to building. What he did not realize was that the invisible hand reshaping the financial landscape around him belonged to the woman he had dismissed as worthless. Emma Whitmore had returned to power, and the first move in her quiet war had already been made. Ryan Brooks believed his new life had finally begun. Chicago glittered around him like a promise fulfilled, the skyline reflecting across the glass walls of the luxury penthouse that Olivia Harrison now called home. Only 3 months earlier, he had been a frustrated analyst living in a modest house in Oregon. Now he wore custom-tailored suits, attended investor dinners in private clubs, and spoke casually about projects worth hundreds of millions of dollars. In his mind, the decision to leave Emma Carter had been the smartest move of his life. She represented the small world he had escaped. Olivia represented the powerful future he deserved. Yet beneath the polished surface of his new success, something had begun to feel strangely unstable. The Harrison Investment Group had been aggressively pursuing acquisitions across several sectors, but every promising deal seemed to vanish at the last moment. Companies they targeted were suddenly purchased by a competitor with deeper capital and faster negotiation teams. Entire negotiations collapsed within hours after Whitmore Global entered the bidding process. Harrison executives spoke about the situation with growing irritation, but Ryan tried not to worry. In the world of high finance, competition was constant. Powerful corporations battled for opportunities every day. Tonight, however, none of that tension mattered. The Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York hosted one of the most prestigious charity galas in the country, and Ryan stood proudly beside Olivia as cameras flashed across the red carpet. The ballroom shimmered with chandeliers and polished marble floors, while the most influential investors, entrepreneurs, and political figures in the country mingled beneath the towering ceilings. Ryan held a glass of champagne and felt the deep satisfaction of belonging to the world he had dreamed about for years. For a brief moment, he even thought about Emma. He imagined her still living quietly in Portland, perhaps volunteering at the same library or tending the same small garden. The thought filled him with a quiet sense of triumph. Then the doors at the far end of the ballroom opened. The conversation across the hall faded as a subtle ripple moved through the crowd. Guests turned toward the entrance with the curious anticipation reserved for powerful arrivals. A woman stepped through the doorway, wearing a midnight blue gown that flowed elegantly across the marble floor. Her dark hair was cut in a precise, modern style, framing a face that carried calm confidence rather than decorative beauty. Diamonds shimmered lightly at her throat, but the true power surrounding her came from the two figures walking beside her. Michael Grant, the legendary attorney who had served the Whitmore family for decades, and Daniel Kuroda, the reserved technology billionaire whose companies quietly controlled entire sectors of artificial intelligence development. Ryan's glass slipped from his hand before he realized what he was seeing. The crystal shattered against the floor with a sharp sound that drew several startled glances. Olivia turned toward him in irritation, but Ryan could not answer her question. His eyes were locked on the woman crossing the ballroom. The face was unmistakable. The posture was different, stronger, almost untouchable, but the features belonged to someone he had once kissed goodbye every morning. Emma Carter was walking through the most powerful room in New York like she owned it. Except she was not Emma Carter anymore. The name circulating through whispers across the ballroom was Emma Whitmore. The Whitmore family heir who had vanished from public life years earlier. The billionaire executive who had recently returned to reclaim control of one of the largest corporate empires in the world. Ryan felt the blood drain slowly from his face as fragments of recent months suddenly aligned with terrifying clarity. The failed acquisitions. The sudden appearance of Whitmore Global in negotiations that should have belonged to the Harrison Investment Group. The invisible competitor dismantling their expansion plans. It had never been coincidence. Emma's eyes moved calmly across the crowd, acknowledging greetings from investors and executives eager to secure her attention. For a brief second, her gaze met Ryan's across the enormous room. He expected shock, anger, perhaps even bitterness. Instead, she looked at him with complete indifference, the same casual glance someone might give to a stranger passing in the street. That look struck harder than any accusation could have. In that moment, Ryan realized the brutal truth he had refused to imagine. The woman he abandoned for wealth had always been wealth itself. Ryan Brooks did not sleep the night after the gala. The image of Emma Whitmore standing beneath the chandelier light followed him back to Chicago, like a shadow he could not escape. In the silence of the penthouse apartment, Olivia shared with him the city lights looked colder than they had the day before. He replayed every memory of their marriage with a growing sense of disbelief. The quiet dinners, the modest clothes, the small house in Oregon. None of it made sense anymore. The woman he had dismissed as ordinary had walked into the most powerful room in New York as the center of gravity. And worse than the revelation itself was the horrifying possibility that everything happening to his career had been quietly orchestrated by her. The next few weeks dismantled Ryan's confidence piece by piece. The Harrison Investment Group had been struggling with stalled deals for months, but after the gala, the pressure intensified. Harrison executives began receiving confirmation that Whitmore Global had successfully acquired the San Francisco logistics company they had been pursuing. It was not simply a business defeat. The purchase shifted control of a major technological advantage directly into Whitmore's hands. Board meetings that once felt optimistic now carried sharp tension. Olivia's father, Charles Harrison, had built his reputation on strategic dominance, and losing such a valuable acquisition humiliated him publicly within financial circles. Ryan tried to reassure everyone that the setback was temporary. He spoke with the same ambitious confidence that had impressed Olivia months earlier. But the atmosphere around him had changed. The more Whitmore Global expanded its presence across their target markets, the more Harrison executives began looking at Ryan with quiet suspicion. It was not logical, yet the coincidence was impossible to ignore. Ryan Brooks had married Emma Carter for 7 years. Emma Carter had suddenly reappeared as Emma Whitmore, and Whitmore Global was now dismantling Harrison expansion projects with ruthless precision. Olivia felt the tension most intensely. Her admiration for Ryan had been built on the idea that he possessed instinctive brilliance in financial strategy. Yet the more the situation escalated, the more she began noticing the cracks beneath his confidence. During late-night conversations, she questioned him about Emma with growing irritation. At first, Ryan tried to minimize the connection, insisting he had no knowledge of Emma's true identity. But Olivia was not naive. She understood power, and she understood humiliation. To discover that her fiancé had unknowingly discarded one of the most powerful women in global finance was more than embarrassing. It was catastrophic. The breaking point came during a private meeting with Charles Harrison and the senior partners of the investment firm. Ryan entered the boardroom expecting to discuss recovery strategies. Instead, he found a wall of cold expressions waiting for him across the polished table. Charles Harrison spoke first, his voice carrying the heavy authority of a man who had spent decades commanding financial empires. He explained that investors were questioning the firm's recent failures and demanding accountability. Ryan's association with Emma Whitmore had become a liability the firm could not ignore. Ryan attempted to defend himself, insisting he had no influence over Whitmore Global's decisions. But the explanation sounded hollow even to his own ears. Charles Harrison listened without interruption before delivering the conclusion that Ryan had secretly feared. The firm would be restructuring its leadership team immediately. Ryan's position would be terminated. Officially, the decision was framed as a strategic adjustment. Unofficially, it was clear to everyone in the room that Ryan Brooks had become the easiest person to blame for the firm's sudden vulnerability. The fallout moved quickly through Ryan's personal life as well. Olivia's attitude toward him shifted from admiration to quiet resentment. Their once glamorous evenings filled with celebration became tense arguments echoing through the penthouse hallways. She had entered the relationship believing Ryan would strengthen her family's influence in the financial world. Now he represented the man who had foolishly discarded Emma Whitmore and provoked an invisible enemy powerful enough to disrupt their entire operation. Within weeks, Olivia ended the engagement with cold practicality. Ryan left the Harrison firm carrying a small box of personal belongings and the crushing awareness that his rise to success had collapsed faster than it began. Financial networks spread the story quickly. Investors who once returned his calls enthusiastically now responded with polite excuses. Invitations to business events quietly disappeared. The ambitious analyst who once believed he was destined for greatness had become a cautionary tale whispered across corporate boardrooms. Meanwhile, Emma Whitmore rarely spoke his name again. From the upper floors of Whitmore Global headquarters, she continued expanding the empire with calm focus. New acquisitions strengthened the company's position in logistics and emerging technologies. Investors praised her decisive leadership. Analysts described her return to power as one of the most remarkable corporate comebacks in recent memory. For Emma, however, the victories felt strangely quiet. Ryan Brooks had once believed she had nothing to offer his future. Now his entire future had quietly vanished beneath the shadow of her success. Ryan Brooks tried to fight the collapse of his reputation, but desperation rarely produces wisdom. Weeks after losing his position at the Harrison firm, anger began replacing the humiliation he carried quietly through the city. In his mind, the situation had twisted into something unfair. He convinced himself that Emma Whitmore owed him for the years they had spent together, that she had used their marriage as a disguise before returning to the world of power without him. Bitterness fed his pride until he made the decision that would destroy the last fragments of his credibility. Ryan sold a dramatic version of their story to a notorious tabloid journalist claiming he had been manipulated by a secret billionaire wife who hid her fortune as part of a psychological game. The article exploded across media channels overnight. Headlines painted Emma as a calculating woman who had deceived an unsuspecting husband, trapping him in a strange experiment about love and loyalty. Financial commentators began whispering about the scandal. Some investors questioned whether a woman capable of such secrecy could truly be trusted to run a global empire. Whitmore Global stock dipped slightly in early trading, and rival corporations quietly watched the situation unfold with cautious interest. For the first time since returning to power, Emma Whitmore faced a storm that could not be solved with a simple acquisition. Inside the top-floor boardroom of Whitmore Global headquarters, the atmosphere remained remarkably calm. Michael Grant and several legal advisors had already assembled detailed reports about the tabloid journalist who published Ryan's accusations. The man had built a career manufacturing scandals around wealthy public figures, but he also carried a long history of financial corruption hidden beneath layers of shell companies and questionable payments. When Emma finished reading the article, she placed the newspaper gently on the table. Her expression revealed neither anger nor fear, only the quiet certainty of someone who had finally reached the end of a long patience. She instructed Michael Grant not to file a simple defamation lawsuit. Instead, the Whitmore Legal Division began a far deeper investigation. Within days, they uncovered a network of illegal payments linking the journalist to corporate blackmail operations. Evidence flowed directly into the hands of federal investigators. The tabloid editor who had eagerly printed Ryan's story suddenly found himself facing criminal charges for fraud and financial extortion. The scandal collapsed almost as quickly as it had appeared, leaving Ryan's accusations discredited across every major news network. Emma decided the final response should be public but not defensive. She agreed to a live televised interview with a respected national journalist known for demanding honesty from powerful figures. When the interview aired, Emma Whitmore sat calmly beneath studio lights, wearing a simple white suit that carried none of the theatrical glamour associated with billionaire elites. She spoke about her marriage without bitterness, explaining that she had hidden her identity years earlier because she wanted to experience a life free from wealth and expectation. Her voice remained steady as she described how the relationship had ended once Ryan discovered she could not offer the resources he desired. Then she revealed the truth Ryan had attempted to bury. Documents appeared on the studio screen showing evidence of his long affair with Olivia Harrison, months before the divorce. Financial records demonstrated that Ryan had secretly accumulated thousands of dollars in personal luxury purchases while complaining about the modest life he shared with his wife. The final revelation stunned viewers across the country. Ryan Brooks had falsified parts of his own background years earlier, exaggerating his personal hardships in order to gain sympathy and career opportunities. Emma ended the interview not with revenge, but with purpose. She announced the creation of the Whitmore Foundation, a multi-billion-dollar initiative dedicated to supporting victims of emotional and financial manipulation. The program would fund legal aid counseling and education for individuals trapped in exploitative relationships. Her message resonated far beyond financial circles. Within hours, the interview transformed public opinion. Emma Whitmore was no longer a mysterious billionaire returning from isolation. She became a symbol of resilience and clarity after betrayal. Months later, the noise surrounding Ryan Brooks faded into obscurity. Rumors suggested he had taken a minor consulting job in another state far removed from the ambitious future he once imagined. Emma Whitmore rarely thought about him again. Her focus shifted toward the future she was building through technology investments and humanitarian projects. On quiet weekends, she sometimes visited a small art gallery in Brooklyn owned by a thoughtful man named Daniel Reed, who spoke about paintings and music with genuine curiosity rather than admiration for her wealth. One autumn afternoon, they walked together through Central Park beneath trees turning gold in the fading sunlight. Emma finally told him the full story of her past, the hidden fortune, the betrayal, and the empire she now commanded. Daniel listened patiently, then smiled with a warmth that carried no trace of intimidation. He told her the only part of the story that mattered to him was the woman standing beside him. For the first time in many years, Emma Whitmore felt the quiet freedom she had searched for when she first left her fortune behind. She had lost a marriage built on illusion, but she had gained something far greater. She had become the master of her own life. Stories like Emma Whitmore's reveal a pattern that experts in psychology and leadership often discuss, but few people truly understand. Real power rarely announces itself. It moves quietly, waits patiently, and reveals its strength only when character is tested. Ryan Brooks believed wealth was something you could chase, something you could upgrade into by choosing the right people. Emma proved the opposite. True value is built inside a person long before the world recognizes it, and when someone underestimates quiet strength, the consequences are rarely small. If this story made you think about ambition, loyalty, and the hidden power people carry, take a moment to support the channel. A simple like and subscribe helps us continue sharing stories that reveal the deeper truths behind success and human character. And before you go, leave a short comment below with just 2 words that capture Emma's journey. Rise strong.